So it's too late for me to pick my nose now, or what?
Hey, is this on? Too.
Hopefully. The screen's not coming up very well because it's too bright for the camera.
The only thing, no, it's not like a joint meeting or anything.
Yeah.
No. Okay, that's okay.
I mean,
to be honest, like, there's nothing in the text that, like, there's a few maps or things, but it was not
Okay,
really.
do you have a mic on you?
I do not.
right there.
Okay, now I do.
Wrap around your ear and around your mouth. Into your mouth.
Let's do it the way that you have it set up, instead of true bending it. Does that work? Check, check. Checking two.
Do it on top of the turn on.
Oh, there we are. Checking, checking. Check, check, check.
Move that just.
Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Feel like Tony Robbins. Are you ready to be here for the first day of your life? There. Exactly. You're not excited enough. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Much better.
I actually, unfortunately, went to something like that. It was a little interesting. Yes.
Our presenter in his little introduction of growing up in the parish, we all know him, Michael Luciuk on Orthodox Music.
Hey, there.
Go
So,
for it.
yeah, so quick background of myself. I grew up here. Woohoo! Hey, I'm home. So not really much to know about me, I guess, credential-wise. So I'm a choir director back at my parish in Toronto, under the Carpatho-Russian diocese. And so that's a little bit fun. Also have a bit of just finishing up a master's in theology. So that's my credentials, but anyways, you know me, so feel free to discount everything I said. Here's the kid coming back and talking to his own parish. So the topic I was asked to talk about was Orthodox music. So I'm going to try to talk about a little bit about the history and the background, as well as the importance, and then maybe some practical tips, having grown up in this parish, maybe some thoughts I have on the parish's music ministry. I think it's really interesting that you kind of come to church and it's like, did we always do it this way? Was it, what is this music that's singing? Where is it from? Why do we have litanies in between things? There's a lot of things that just kind of have happened, and everything that you have is a weight of 2 centuries of tradition, liturgy-wise, and everything musically happened accidentally, because that was the tone that somebody sang and everybody loved it, and it kind of kept that way. Or Father Tikhon, when he came and kind of established the music program, he had a book of resources from St. Vlad's music, and that's the music that we use. So it kind of came there, but why do we even sing that way, and where did it come from the background? So I kind of wanted to first of all start with that. So context. What is the context behind the music that we speak? So, where does music in the church kind of come from? So, the first thing I'd like to start with is Old Testament. So, how is music used in the worship in the Old Testament church? So, first of all, in the Old Testament, we have a lot of references to heavenly worship, and it's usually always about, and temple worship, and always the kind of hermeneutic, like the message behind when music is mentioned, is that it's supposed to mimic the heavenly worship. So we get a lot of this of like the angelic, cherubic hymn, the angelic song you hear in Revelations of the choirs of angels and this kind of liturgy that's going on with the martyrs underneath the altar, kind of thing. And so we have a lot of that from Isaiah, from Exodus and Ezekiel, that talks about kind of like prophets being caught up into heaven and seeing this kind of liturgical worship that has music. So interestingly, in most of the scriptures it has instruments in the worship, and instruments were used in the temple. So there's things such as the shofar, there's harps, there's different types of things like that were used in liturgical moments of the liturgy. So what you had is you had songs kind of sung with repetitive verse, and so the psalm book became kind of the hymnal of the ancient Jewish church, and so a lot of those psalms are the vast majority of what they would sing, along with certain like excerpts from the book of Exodus or things like that they kind of brought into their worship. And so they would kind of sing that with either a repetitive verse like praise the Lord in the heavens, and then sing it much like we do today in a communion hymn, or they would sing it back and forth, with one verse and then the other verse kind of thing, and done. And often what happened in later versions of Israel worship, which is like the development of the synagogues, because what happens is the temple gets destroyed, Israel gets dispersed, and they get taken back to Babylon and things like that, and they have to rebuild worship because they don't have the temple anymore to do it. They don't really have the priesthood rites that are happening anymore, so they have these synagogues that develop, this kind of whole ritual, which is the Pharisees that Jesus is condemning. But interestingly, we keep a lot of the Pharisees' synagogal worship, and they kind of have a cantor that leads people, and then there's certain hymns that are done where everybody sings together, kind of in this antiphonal way. So, for example, praise God in the sanctuary, Psalm 150. You see, there's about 7 or 8 instruments. There's dancing mentioned, a little bit far cry probably from what you're used to here on an average Sunday. But I'd also say that this isn't probably not what you would see if you came to a synagogue. You wouldn't see people dancing in the synagogue kind of thing. Like, this is more processional type of things. When they bring the ark in, you hear David bringing in the ark in, and he's dancing in front of the ark and getting admonished for it by his wife for dancing. So, how is music used in pagan Rome? Interestingly, there's kind of 4 main uses of instruments. So there's kind of driving the evil eye away. So you have like a spirit of despondency, probably what we call depression today, but the evil eye has a lot more of like a kind of a you've been touched and cursed kind of attitude to it, and you can drive it away by playing instruments. So there's probably reference of that, of like David driving away Saul's evil spirit within there. That's one of the reasons why he's doing it, is he's coming from that kind of Greek culture that has that idea. There's euphoric rituals, so flutes and drums, and it's kind of like what you would consider of like tribal dancing kind of thing, and working yourself into a stupor kind of thing. There's rituals invoking the gods, and so one of the earliest like written down music that we have is like a Song of the Dead, and people have tried to reproduce it, but it's incredibly discordant. It's very similar to like modern music that you get, where you get these soundscapes where people try to do like all kinds of discordant tones and hear it. That's much more what the music is, and it's kind of like if we sing loud enough, we'll somehow get the gods. And then there's also like nice types of music as well, and that's used in the temple worship. And then there's entertainment, so wedding and feasts. So the only kind of one that was usually vocal only was mythic stories, so kind of like your bard telling like an epic poem in sung verse, or kind of communal, like people sitting around and doing like folklore type of worship songs kind of thing. So it wasn't very highly regarded, music and instruments. Socrates, for example, says, men of worth and culture, you'll find no girls piping or dancing or harping kind of thing. So music is considered, of the low masses and their estate, and that kind of is taken up by the early church. So Christians have paid reverence to the discussions of God, but and then they go outside and they do all of this amateuring, flute playing and stuff like that. But that's not really our kind of stuff. Like, that's not really why we're doing this. And so mostly the reason why we don't have instruments is this kind of rhetoric against the culture that they saw of the Greeks and pagans and stuff, and like, we're not into this euphoric dancing until we're high and feasts and things like that. We're very sober and sober-minded, and so we kind of take that tradition. The name is escaping right now, but there's a Greek tradition of like controlling your senses. We, being Orthodox, we talk about that. We bring that language into controlling your passions and being sober-minded and things like that. And so that's why we don't have instruments. So the early church, early church. So we're talking about the times of the apostles. they're still praying in the temple with all the other Jews, and they're going to the synagogue, and that's largely doing this kind of a cappella music worship, and they're going to the temple with the horns and bagpipes. Of course, the temple gets destroyed in the 70 AD, so there's no more temple worship, and that kind of gets rid of a lot of the instrument worship in the Judaism as a whole too. And again, like as I said, they kind of say the rejection of instruments is important. So it's practical, vocal is portable. If you guys are meeting in somebody's basement or somebody's home somewhere, you don't have to lug around a giant harp in. People start asking questions of why are you bringing a harp to the catacombs. So it's much more portable. It's this reactionary against the revelry and the euphoria of the paganism and the temple worship that was happening there. And it's kind of monastic, so there's an avoidance of performance. You're not trying to like be the best performer out there. Like I know certain Christian groups will kind of almost make it into a rock concert. They're trying to avoid the rock concert field. I don't know if they reject rock music today, but they would definitely probably reject the like it's a performance around one person kind of side of things. Like that definitely was part of the rhetoric against instruments and what were happening then. And then when Constantine, so this kind of continues on, and Christianity expands, so about 40 or 50% of the empire of people are kind of practicing Christians. Constantine kind of uses that and has his conversion moment and brings in Christianity as a state religion within the empire with the Edict of Milan. And the church that develops during that time keeps that prohibition against instruments, but it brings in some of the court ritual and pomp that happened in the ritual of the state. So if you were ancient Roman, when you would see liturgy happen in two places. You'd see it in the temple. When you went, there was rituals that you had to do. There was songs that people did. There was bringing of offerings, and sacrifices. But when you went to when a state dignitary happened, or even the democratic Athens, when there's an election happening or anything like that, there's certain things that people have to say. There's songs that you sing. There's certain music that you do, kind of thing. There's processions of people that come in. Very similar to like if you were to go to the Queen's speech from the throne or her coronation. There's a ton of actions that happen there and certain songs that have to be sung. God Save the Queen, Long Live Britannia, My Fair Country is Thee. The hymnal list is already set up, and there's some courtier out there that his job is to make sure that is done as perfectly as possible when the next king or queen is inaugurated, to that ritual that has happened 50 or 60 times before. And so this happens where many of those elements come into the Christian worship. So two traditions start developing. So the first is what I'll call, so remember, right, up until this point, until Christianity is public, you have people meeting in people's homes. It's very similar to a Jewish synagogue kind of thing in worship, and it's smaller groups. So then when Christianity becomes public, they're able to build spaces that are dedicated to worship. They're able to, do things in a very public manner. And so that's where we get most of the time where our liturgical kind of function develops is in this, 300s through 9th century AD. And so the cathedral rite is kind of marked, one thing I would describe it as is, if you've ever been to a Catholic Mass, you'll kind of feel like the Catholic Mass is stripped down from what we Orthodox think of liturgy to like bare basics. And you notice like the priest kind of processes in and things like that. It's a little bit closer to what we would think of at the cathedral rite. So there's a focus on processions. So it actually starts with people coming from a chapel at the one edge of the gate of the city, and people would process through, and it would stop at different spots of the city, different chapels, and gather people and take them all the way into the basilica, the main church of the place for a Sunday. There was like a Sunday procession. Every Sunday there would be a parade with like people coming, and they would sing, and they would sing the antiphons that are kind of coming. They get to the end of the church, They finish the antiphons, and the bishop prays, and then the bishop processes in, and the people process into to Hagia Sophia together, kind of thing. So you can think of like 200, probably Hagia Sophia is like 10,000 people, 20,000 people kind of all processing into this church at the exact same moment, kind of thing, as the deacons would throw open the doors as you sing, "Oh, come, let us worship," and you kind of come in. There's also these kind of repetitive hymns with a solo verse and a choral refrain. So this is the Prokimenons, the communion hymns, are the way that we think of them is developed. So basically there's somebody that knows the verses by heart, or is rich enough to afford the book, or is given the book, kind of thing, that is able to sing the verse, and then everybody would respond, kind of thing. So if you go to a demonstration of like, "We are not going to take it no more, no more, no," somebody's kind of lead it, and then everybody does something that assents to that thing. So this is what you do when the reader is over here at the Prokimenon and says the Prokimenon's the third tone, praise the Lord, O Lord, save your people and bless your inheritance, kind of thing. And so then we sing that verse, and then he says a psalm verse, and they would do that. But think of it going through the entire psalm, so all 40 or 50 verses of that psalm, kind of thing. And it's a lot shorter. A lot shorter than the monastic services, probably roughly the same length of today, but a little bit more time was probably spent on like a homily at the end. And there was less services with more spectacle. So you probably, if you lived in a larger city, you had a morning prayer, an evening prayer, you had a liturgy, kind of thing, and that was the 3 times the church was used in the day. So then, Christianity is spreading. Everybody and their dog is trying to get into Christianity. You need to be a Christian and to really move up in society. So there's a political impetus to become a Christian, and that understandably dilutes the pool of people that are there. People aren't there because they're like willing to die for the faith. They're there because their mother's telling them to go, because if they're not, they're not going to get the cool job in the army that they really needed to have, kind of thing. So that dilutes the pool. And so you have this Reformed tradition of people that are like, we've got to go back to the basics. So I want to go back to the way that original Christianity was. And so those people kind of flee the cities, set up nice monastic cells in the desert, kind of thing. You have the desert fathers, Moses the Black, and Antony, kind of thing, all of these kind of great monastic figures, and they create this monastic tradition of trying to go back to the early church, and so monasticism kind of comes from that way, and it's focused on very kind of contemplative form of worship. So it's a little more simpler. There's a lot less pomp or circumstances. The sign of excess by the monastic fathers is that at one point in Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, during the Cherubic hymns, some subdeacons were thrown by ropes across to symbolize the angels during the entrance. Whether or not that's true, some monastic person is like using that as like a apologetics of like the evil of the worship in the cities, kind of thing, how it's so far gone. And meanwhile, like, we're very sober-mindedness. Not a single one of us moves during the 6 Psalms. You cannot hear a breath be made, kind of thing. So, like, that's the comparisons of the two, kind of getting this idea. And so there's often a focus on a single chanter singing, kind of thing. So if you went to a Greek service, kind of have that feeling of like a psaltery that stands up there that leads people. Maybe there's a small choir. And people's job is to just sit there and pray in their hearts and stuff. So we're very formed in the OCA by Schneemann, who is like, everybody needs to participate, but these monastic fathers and writers would say, no, like, you don't need to participate. Your job is to talk with God, and the music should be supporting that kind of thing. And so that's kind of the emphasis behind it. So there is antiphonal singing. So there was antiphonal singing here, where I said where it was a single person doing a verse. Their antiphonal singing is, they divide the church into one half and the other church on the other side. So women and men, or all the monks on the right side and all the monks on the left side. and they would sing back and forth psalm verses, with like verse A being the left side, and then verse B being the right side, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until you got to the end of the psalm. So so this, that kind of develops that way.
Like we do it pre-sanctified here.
Yeah, exactly. Da 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 da. Yeah, exactly. So we kind of do that, and in some ways, I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but our antiphons at liturgies, where bless the Lord, oh my soul, that is actually meant to be done on side by side, where one side would sing it, and then the other side would kind of rest for a moment while the other side does the next side. So we still have that in a lot of places, that kind of style of doing it as well. A lot longer services and a lot more services. So it's during this time that you get not just Vespers and Matins, but now you have a service for every hour of the day kind of thing. There's comp line at night after Vespers, just before you go to bed. There's liturgy, kind of thing. And vigils can be extremely long. If I've never been to Mount Athos, but some friends talking about going to a vigil that lasted from 10 p.m. at night until 4:30 in the morning, when they served liturgy. And then at 5:30 they all went to bed and woke up, had a breakfast, went to bed, and woke up at 11 o'clock at night in the morning to continue their day, kind of thing. So it's really crazy, and it creates all kinds of musical things. There's something called Nika, which is just nonsense symbols, and so the monk will be singing a psalm, and it's not even long enough. So in order to make it stretch out for those 4 hours, he just gets to Alleluia, and then for about 20 minutes. Nika in this term, anytime there was ni or ka, he could riff on that and just keep on doing that to kind of lengthen the service. And it didn't matter for people, they knew that at the end they'd still hear the text eventually, but this was the time that they could kind of pray in their hearts. And so you get to liturgies. I'll just mention this out because this is way too small to see. So early church, it's really simple. There's two liturgies. There's a liturgy, there's time for people to gather, and there's hymns sung as people gather. Then there's teaching, where you read epistles or books or somebody talks, and there's homily. And then you do kind of liturgy of the Eucharist, of the meal kind of thing. Originally it's actually a meal, and the communion side of it is just part of the meal kind of thing, but then it develops into its whole rite, so what we call it the anaphora now. There's communion, and then people get dismissed with a hymn and they leave, kind of thing. That is the early thing. Then we get the state church, and we get that processional antiphon where people are gathering in and they get to the church. The bishop does the entrance, which is our little entrance, oh, come, let us worship. That's what they sing as they all come into the church, kind of thing, as they enter in. And the gospel book is brought into the church by the deacons. The gifts are brought in, and then kind of it's all brought in. Then there's the Troparion and Kontakion. And so Troparion and Kontakion of today is just a few hymns around the day, right? Where you have, hymn for the resurrection and a hymn for whatever saint or feast of the day, and then maybe a saint for the hymn for the church. So Troparions and Kontakions were actually really long in the original church. There's a book, a person, the Saint Romanos the Melodist, and he's kind of the inventor of the Kontakion. And there's a beautiful book of 50 of his Kontakions. And so we still sing most of his Kontakions, but we sing just the repetitive verse, the chorus of his Kontakions. So the Kontakion for Bright Tuesday, actually, we do it at our church, and it's 120 verses of the hymn of it is I am the sinful woman, I'm poured down by the shame of guilt of my sins, kind of thing. And that's just the first verse, and the repetitive thing is the guilt of my sins, or the shame of my sins, kind of thing. And then there's 150 verses of the sinful woman that's not really scriptural, that's her going through and realizing that her life is wrong, and going out to the moneylender and buying the ointment and coming to it, and then Christ is speaking with the Pharisee about if only you could see the sin of your guilt of your sins, you would be saved, kind of thing. So it's 150 verses long. It takes about 20 minutes to sing, kind of thing, and that's just the one thing. And everybody would, so he sings like, for I long for, and then everybody sings, the sin, the filth of my sins, the filth of my sins, sorry. So, and so everybody would sing that part, and then he would continue on, So the woman went and came to the myrrh seller, and and keeps on going through, and for I long to buy the myrrh for, and everybody, the filth of my sins. So that kind of is the Troparians, Catachians kind of thing. And so we've kind of kept it, but we've kept it because it's the movable things that help us think about what the church is wanting to do. It's something new. It's kind of making you think, okay, what's the theme of the day, almost in that way. So then there's the Prokeimenon, and the Prokeimenon is, again, it's a full psalm verse, so it's like 50 verses, and today it's been shortened to three verses, so much shorter. So then there's the readings. So back then, it's not until about the 15th century, there's an Old Testament reading and a reading from a saint, and then there's the epistle and the gospel, and then there's the preaching that happens. You dismiss the catechumens out of the church. That happened in both of them. And then there's litanies. So this is where you pray for the sick, the suffering, all of those kind of things like that, which we keep doing here. And then the Trubik hymn, which is in the 8th century that the Trubik hymn comes in, and this is the chance for choirs to show off everywhere. But it's the hymn because there's much more prayers added. But basically, in the state church, there's something called the Sculptarian, and it was a building on the side of the church. And it's where people brought all the donations that were going to be given out by the church in its social ministries. So if you were a baker, you brought bread. If you were a candle maker, you brought candles. If you were if you were rich, you brought money. Whatever the case may be, kind of thing. People brought their best, and the deacons would then distribute it out to the orphans, the widows, the people in the ministry. And so people would come to church with that procession, and they bring their things and give them to the deacons. Deacons, by this point, would hopefully have organized things and found what they thought was the best 3 or 4 loaves, and they would process in at this point, in with the best 3 or 4 loaves and the best jug of wine that they thought was the one that should be used for the service today, kind of thing. So they would come in through there, and that took a while to do. So the Trubik hymn kind of developed to kind of cover that procession up. So why I brought up the Catholic Church, you still actually see that where they bring up like the wine and the bread kind of at that moment, kind of thing. Then, and we do it. We just have our Sculptarian on the side here, and we don't quite gather as many donations because most of us give by money instead of by bread. So we have it here just on the side, and it's brought out around kind of thing. So the Sculptarian kind of enters into the church. Then there's the Creed, the Anaphora. The Creed, develops over time, gets longer and longer as there's more and more heresies. The Anaphora, again, the liturgy of the Eucharist. All the catechumens are gone out of here now. There's the Lord's Prayer. It gets added in after it's kind of a state church. Communion, and then dismissal hymn. And the dismissal hymn, if you actually notice, Father kind of comes out and does a prayer before the ambo. If this was the early church, he'd walk out the door at that point, and then the deacon would finish up the service, kind of thing. So that's yeah. So again, we actually see that in the Catholic Church where the priest actually processes to the back at the end as people sing one last final hymn. So, different thing. The same liturgical tradition kind of thing lived out in different ways over time. The monastic one, it gets really longer. So they developed this service called matins. So earlier people would have just a short morning prayer that they would do that was just kind of very similar to the Shema of the Judaic worship kind of thing, with a bit more hymnography. So they developed this whole service called matins. It's really beautiful, and it has this, we don't really do it at this parish too much, but a lot of Greek parishes and like Russian cathedral parishes will have it at the end of their vespers, so what's called vigil. And it has something called the canon. And the canon is 9 odes, though actually only do 8 of them, except for Holy Tuesday. And it's 1 troparion plus another like 4 troparion, and there could be 2 or 3 canons. So it takes like half an hour or 45 minutes to do the canons, and it's all for whatever theme of the day, the resurrection or a saint or a feast kind of thing. And so they've developed that, and that becomes like the high point of monastic worship. And then they developed something called typica. So typica was originally a service that you did if you didn't have communion. And so it was rather short. It was like you did a few of the greatest hits of liturgy and consumed the communion that you had received. The extra bread, you would take it home and consume it throughout the week as a prayer. The monastics kind of take this in overdrive and develop a whole service around it that takes about 40 minutes to do. And so they end up doing the matins, and then they do typica, and then they start liturgy. So you're already in the church, so there's no need to have a procession through the city, because people should have been here for 2 hours already, for gosh sake. And so they kind of do that. And so what happens is that there's actually antiphons that are done in the typica, and this supplants the antiphons that they would have done during the processions. So we interestingly sing kind of both of them in different times in our liturgical life. So we at St. Mark's here sing, bless the Lord, O my soul. That psalm is the 3 psalms of typica kind of thing. And so that kind of supplants the other psalms kind of thing, particularly in the Russian church, but different traditions throughout all of the areas kind of take on those psalms. But then on feast days, we switch back sometimes to the, like Paschal time, we switch back to the ancient processional antiphons of, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. And O Son of God, who has crucified, or rose in from the dead, save us, we sing to you." So it's, and they basically, that verse is repeated over and over again. And there's a different set of psalms that are used for that kind of thing. So that takes over. There's an entrance, but now they're in the church, so it enters from the altar, and the gospel book comes out of the altar because it's already been, it's actually on a stand in the center of church for matins. So the priest comes out, grabs the altar book from the center, and then processes it back into the church. Well, we don't do matins here, so it just comes straight from the altar all the way back in, kind of thing. And then we have troparions and kontakions, and we've shortened it down to those 2 or 3 hymns that we sing kind of thing, because you've got to make room for the canon in the morning, and that's where the real troparions are. There's like 80 there. Why are we going to do like 20 here? Kind of thing. And then there is the stand at the prokimenon, and they shorten the prokimenon again, just because they've already been in the church for such a long time already. And they do the readings and teachings. But because the Old Testament is done at Vespers the night before, in that new service that's developed, well, we don't really need to do it in the liturgy anymore, so the Vespers kind of leaves the liturgy by the 12th century kind of thing, and it's not really done on a regular basis. Copts and people that left the church, in the schisms, like the 300 to 400 AD, still do the Old Testament to their liturgies, for example. And the Roman Church brought it back in Vatican II, actually, I think, where they do an Old Testament reading now. Then there's dismissal of catechumens, if there are a catechumen, and a litany, so we still do that. But there's now a litany at the beginning, because everybody's at the church, so you do a litany to start the service, kind of thing, and then you do a litany after the gospel, kind of thing. You kind of doubled or tripled the litanies as they've kind of developed over time. Cherubic hymn, still there. Creed, and there's a few more litanies. Anaphora, there's the Lord's Prayer. And the Theotokian hymn is added, because the Theotokian hymn is actually from the 9th note of the canon, and it's just kind of like a bring it back into the service kind of thing at that time. And then you have the communion, and then you have dismissal hymns kind of thing. So it's the same liturgy, it's just, it went like really long, and then certain parts got shorted, and certain things kind of come in, and that's how we get to our modern liturgy. So bringing it up just to kind of understand like why we're even doing it. I think like maybe that kind of will help you a little bit of like, well, why is the prokimenon the way it is kind of thing, and why do you do it? And it actually helps you understand some cultural differences. So if you ever go to one of the Greek services here and could understand it, the prokimenon is like only 1 verse, but then in the Russian it's 2 verses, kind of thing. They've just kind of even shortened it even farther, kind of thing. That kind of kept the process of doing that. So so this is already in place by the 8th century. There's later adaptations, but most of them are reforms to non-liturgical services, less to liturgy. There's a few things that are added here or there, but without getting into it, I think that's pretty fair to say. And by the 15th century, it's pretty much codified. If you're an Eastern Orthodox, you have the same liturgy no matter where you go. The printing press has made it so that, like with other than some slight cultural differences, your liturgy is your liturgy, kind of thing. So basically, the liturgy kind of, as a text, remains the same. But some of the things kind of, so basically the liturgy has two parts to it. It has the set prayers that don't change from Sunday to Sunday, and then there's kind of this textual tradition that builds up, largely by the monastic influence of kind of poetry that changes from Sunday to Sunday. And so there's basically kind of, if you were a reader in the church and some country thing back in like 5th century Greece, you had an epistle book, and you had 4 other books. You had an oktiaktos, and what an oktiaktos is literally Greek for 8 tones, and so it had 8 tones for each day of the week. It's kind of like, well, we're in services as monastics for 30 hours a week or 40 hours a week. We really wouldn't want to get bored, so can we at least like repeat it so that like we don't hear the same hymn over and over again until 8 weeks from now, kind of thing. A little bit less of a problem if you're only going to church on Sundays because you get that same 8 tones all your life, but it's quite a distance between the services. So there's basically for every day of the week there's a different hymn that's done there, all based around the resurrection. Then there's the Menaion, and so the Menaion has a hymn, a set of poetry for every day, and so it's usually based around the calendar of the saints. So St. Lawrence of Rome that we just celebrated, he has like 5 pages of what to sing at Vespers, what to sing at Matins, what Troparion to sing at Liturgy, kind of thing. What Prokeimenon should you sing for him, kind of thing. And so you kind of build that out. But also any of the feast days, like Dormition, okay, it has a Menaion entry, and so that's where you find the hymns for that, and it tells you where to get it. And you kind of mix the 2 of them in together. Then there's a few other books, the Triodian, which is all the Lenten music, the Pentecostarian, which is all Paschal stuff, and so you put those in when those times come in, and so you would be an expert at being able to weave all those things in. And so you kind of combine these together. So for example, it's Sunday kind of thing, and it's we're in the 7th tone because last week we did the 6th tone, so we need to do that Troparion and Kontakion for the day. And it's Dormition, so that would go, we need to do the Dormition hymn, but if it was Resurrection, you know what, it actually supplants the Otiaktos, so because it's Ascension, we're going to get rid of the Troparion of the day, kind of thing, so you kind of have this whole system, and then, the Saint of Day would go underneath that, and if he's a really important saint, we might do something a little bit more, he might be a little bit more prominent in the list than, a lesser saint, and let's maybe do only one of the saints, because there's like 80 saints in the day, kind of thing, and then the Saint of the Temple at the very end of it. So it builds that out. Luckily, most of this stuff is now handled by the beauty of the internet, and there's apps, and there's websites, and there's that like OCA.org, Antiochian.org, that have to pay somebody to prepare it and think through all of these things so that you don't have to do it. And so it's all prepared through there, and the nice legacy of Father Tikhon is that pretty much I think every Sunday possible is now printed out. So Father just literally hands you the sheet and says, this is what you have to do. So you don't have to do any of that thinking to kind of why that was all mixed together, kind of thing. So to support that, there's the early church has a Jewish tradition of like certain hymns. And so you just do this hymn that for Psalm 93, right? Like it's just the hymn kind of thing that goes there. And there's a bit of music that's developed kind of thing. But in order to support that, there's basically a tonal music system that's developed that people are like, okay, well, if we're going to change the text up every week, we probably should change up the melody too, because to be gosh sake, after singing it, 52 times, times 356 days of the year, I'm getting really tired of singing the same tone over and over again. So let's add a little bit of development to that, and so they developed a musical system. So the original system becomes to be known what's called Byzantine chant. The Byzantine chant that we know today is not quite the same that would be back then. Like Byzantine chant has evolved over the 16 centuries kind of thing. And so, especially because of wars and, Constantinople being, pillaged and racked and destroyed as a country, there's multiple times where like it kind of has to be rebuilt from scratch in a way by people. So it's built based on 8 tones. It's 8 tones of the scale kind of thing. So that's how they kind of think of it. Okay, let's start. What is a melody that we could do if we started with a C? C, okay, and then D. Okay, we'll do a different melody. I think I can think of a melody there. E, and that. The Byzantine scale isn't quite the Western scale. It's like 2 of the notes are slightly semitones of each other of what we would consider it, but it's roughly that kind of idea of like, let's take the 8 notes of the scale and let's just put a melody to each of them, kind of thing. So, and it's monophonic, which means that everybody would sing it together, the melody, and ESON develops later. So it's not until the 16th century that you actually hear what's called an ESON, which is like the note that someone will just hold there to make it sound a little bit nicer. Ooh. So what I would think of is like the analogy would be like a bagpipes, where somebody's playing the bagpipe and then they play the melody on top of whatever the ESON that the bagpipes is. And by the way, the bagpipes date back to like 9th century BC, so probably inspired ESON. And then there's the chant notation, so it's not the notes that we're used to. And so as a singer, it's kind of this chant notation. It's all relative, and basically it's like, okay, at this part I'm supposed to scoop down. So God is okay, I gotta say the one, the Lord. Okay, like Lord, and has He revealed Himself to us. So you kind of like learn it that way. It's not as precise as Western notation, but it's kind of more like a guideline of how you do it by the shapings of these notes. And it's really standardized in like the 16th century as well, so it like does vary based on it. So, but it's kind of the way that people learn it. Here, I'll just play an example of Byzantine chant in case. So this is Kyrie eleison, or Lord have mercy. So that, like the augmented litany that we do at our church of Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. That's the Byzantine style of doing that. And so that kind of developed. So that's in the Greek part of the empire, which is about 70% of the population kind of thing. That kind of becomes the dominant way of singing. Even if you like Coptic, like Egyptian melodies are based on the Byzantines. Like it's kind of the cultural system that's there, and it's mostly taken from popular music or hymns used in the court ritual and pomp. They took the melodies and then adapted it for this use kind of thing, and so it kind of developed that way. So if you're in the Rome, there's a distinct chant that kind of dominates the Western one called Roman chant. Now, what's fascinating about it is, well, maybe just listen to it. So this is Kyrie eleison again. So it sounds probably very Greek to you, very Byzantine, right? And so that is the chant that is used in Rome kind of thing at the time. And so up until like about the 12th or 9th century or something like that, that's, if you go to Rome, that's the style of music you hear. Probably would not sound odd to you if you were from Byzantium, from Constantinople kind of thing, if you were going to Rome, and vice versa kind of thing. Like it'd just be like, oh yeah, it's a little different, but I can see the connection kind of thing of it. It sounds beautiful. So from that develops a bunch of other styles, and so there's different different areas kind of develop different versions of it and kind of take it and grow it into their own things. So Ambrosian is like in the area of Milan kind of thing, and they develop their own version of it. It's completely lost. People don't have any written version of it anymore. Mozarabic is like in the Carthaginian area kind of thing, because Carthage was a huge major city at the time, where it's now modern Libya. They have their own style that's very similar to Byzantine chant. Same thing, it's kind of lost. Galician is the French style of doing it. Again, it's actually lost. There's like a monastery in France that has tried to revive it, kind of thing. But Gregorian is the one that's done by the Franks, Frankish Gaul, and it's actually Johann Cassian, who's a saint in the East. He starts a bunch of monasteries inspired by monasticism in the East, and one of those monasteries kind of develops their own form of the chant called Gregorian chant. One of the popes loved this chant so much, and he really wanted to culturally unify, his empire. Especially, this is after the fall of the split of the East and West, and where there's now kind of two empires kind of functionally going. And so he pushes on in the 9th century kind of this Gregorian chant that's based on like I said, it was based on the Roman chant that in this Frankish Gaul, but a little bit different. So this is Kyrie sung with that. Ignore the instruments behind it, but you get the idea. But I did actually want the music on there because it shows what the Eson sounds like, and there's actually an Eson in there until like the 15th century as well. So it's kind of the same thing. So it all comes from Byzantine, or that Greekish style and culture that was kind of adopted across the Roman Empire. So interestingly, Byzantine chant is kind of the dominant one, other than the fact that like Russia has 100 million people in it, and Ukraine kind of things like that. It's like half the world uses some form of Byzantine chant, and as the missionaries mostly come from Byzantium and spread, they spread to like Serbia. It adopts Byzantine chant, Bulgaria, Romania, kind of thing. And what happens is some of them kind of adapt in popular melodies into it. So Serbian, so Byzantine tone 4 is like, God is the Lord and has revealed himself unto us. And Serbian have actually replaced it with their own melody. God is the Lord and has revealed himself to us. And so they just, put in it. So their tone 1 is exact same as Byzantine, but the tone 4, they stuck in that kind of popular melody and threw it in kind of thing. And over time it kind of did that. And also their tones slightly would be recognizable to a Byzantine, but just sound just a little bit differently kind of thing. Same thing that happens in Bulgaria. They kind of keep Byzantine chant, but they develop their own tradition that they kind of slowly replace a bunch of Byzantine stuff with. And Romania kind of keeps it the same, but they kind of make it their own in certain ways. Sorry. So then we get to where does our music come from? So there's an interesting thing that develops in the 8th century, which is the Slavic adoption of Christianity. So it starts off, this is a map of the empire. So you have down here Byzantine Empire here, and there's this new group called the Bulgarians that are certain groups of like tribal people that have actually been supplanted by the Magyars, the Mongols, and have been pushed out of what is Ukraine and like Abkhazia, Russia, and Crimea, and things like that, have been pushed out of it by the Mongols and are fleeing it. And so they invade what is at this time called Thrace, which is like a Greekish kind of state kind of thing, and invade en masse and settle in what's now Bulgaria and Romania, Serbia, Croatia, that kind of area kind of thing, en masse. And they kind of are called the Slavs. So the first group invades, they have some success against the Greek Byzantine Empire and push them out of Thrace kind of thing, and kind of fight and nearly bring the Byzantine Empire to its knees and push it down. They eventually are kind of brought into a stalemate, and the Byzantine Empire kind of wants to make treaties with them, and one of the things that they say is that like it would be really helpful if you adopted Christianity. And so there's the kind of, at this time, Boris of Bulgaria decides to become Christian, and Bulgaria becomes a Christian nation. So what happens is, well, Byzantine sends hundreds of monks and seminarians and priests up to Bulgaria to teach people, to train people, kind of thing, and so they kind of spread their things. The Bulgarian language is the closest we have to Slavonic. It's kind of Proto-Slavonic. The linguists would argue with that kind of thing, but basically it's from there that you develop like the Cyrillic alphabet and things like that. And so there's two young groups, the Greeks named Cyril and Methody, or Methodius, and they're in the Bulgarian mission, and they write to permissions asking to spread beyond just the Bulgarian emperor, but to other Slavic groups out of there. And so they kind of do a mission to somewhere to Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia, kind of thing, and start their mission developing the Cyrillic alphabet into a written form so that they can write the Bible down into it. Their version of Cyrillic, by the way, isn't the one that's used by any culture anywhere, but it inspired other ones, kind of thing, which is now used, and they kind of spread to the Slavs. So then, the Mongols kind of settle down and become hungry, or pushed back a little bit, kind of thing, by the Bulgarians and different groups. And there's this group of people called the Kievan Rus, which is right here, which is probably northern half of Ukraine, all the way up to St. Petersburg is kind of their empire. And they're a group of like different tribes that have gotten together and formed kind of an empire. They have some success, and they really want an empire, a political alliance with Byzantium. And then there's also the story of sending down delegates, and they go down and they see that of all the religions, Orthodoxy is the most beautiful, and Hagia Sophia, we've seen heaven and earth, and so they decide to become Christian, and so they spread to they Christianize their empire, and Greece sends a ton of Bulgarian now missionaries to go preach to these Slavic people, because they're also Slavs, and they're have a similar language structure kind of thing, and so they go and kind of establish things. So there is a chant called Zanemi. Zanemi. By the way, I probably will butcher every name because I'm horrible with details, but that is done in the Bulgarian Empire, and that chant is kind of used as the initial chant, along with some Byzantium chant, when they go up there to the Kievan Rus people and kind of and preach. So it's kind of the homegrown version that's developed, that had a bit of a root in Byzantic chant, but that probably is more based on folk melodies of 8 tones that kind of happen, and so they kind of go in there and they create that. And so Zanemi is monophonic, meaning everybody sings the same note, and there's an E-song. So this is an example of that. So that chant that's developed in Bulgaria kind of becomes the dominant one that people use, and it really influences most of the Russian melodies that are out there. And so by the 15th century, it gets polyphony. So I'll just share that exact same melody with polyphony. So you kind of get that. So basically, I'll talk about that a little bit later, but basically, Western style of polyphony kind of comes in, and all of these people that are Western trained kind of come, and the thing that they want to do after they've gone to their French Academy of Music or German Academy of Music is that they want to try to adapt what they've learned there and take it and apply it in a church kind of context. And so what they do is they adapt the Zanemi to it. And so we use Zanemi actually in a few places. I'll try to think of them, but there is Zanemi that we will use on a day-to-day basis kind of chant that's done. And then there's other chants that are based on that are kind of like mixtures of it. And I'll just play a brief one, which is Velamo chant. So there's kind of mixtures of Byzantine and Zanemi chant that kind of like also developed directly from that period, and that's from a monastery in Valam, which is still around, and they still use that chant. They're probably one of the only places that still kind of use that chant there. So it meets it, and people are using this, but there's also idiorhythmic melodies that people adopt and create, and it's usually centered around a specific monastery. You know, monasteries are like stable places where you can actually have a job as a singer, and they can support you as a singer, kind of thing. You have a choir, kind of thing, and so they kind of become like, they also stay around for a long time, so that causes the likelihood of the thing that you wrote actually lasting, kind of thing. And so there's other polyphony that come, and this is probably closer to the music that was done by the Kievan Rusin people, and I think it's just more interesting, but it's actually idiorhythmic, which means that they didn't care so much of like having the rhythms matched together. So a lot of Orthodox music, it's like, "Oh Lord, save your people." Every note that everybody does is that, "Oh Lord, save your people," you know, kind of thing. Now, if you go to like Western Mozart or things like that, you'll hear like a bunch of moving things, but often it's like there's like one person that's just doing a descant that's moving, but there's still the melody underneath it. And then there's like somebody that's like doing the melody just a few beats off and then going to join back in, but like they're doing it in a very specific way. It's always built around that melody. Idiorhythmic music means that like the timing doesn't matter so much, and you know, we're going to kind of play with it, and we're going to have the melody done in 3 different lines and 3 different octaves and try to put it together to make it polyphonic, which is really interesting. Here, let me share that. So this is Demestveni. So that's actually my church at singing. And then this is Strochnoi chant. This is this is probably the best one where you can hear all the different notes. So this is actually 3 melodies, but sung at like different starting at different times in the melody. And that's actually the dominant church style for a very long time, or next to Zanemi. And then Georgian, which is interesting too. So interesting, Georgian isn't Kievan Rusin, it's actually Turkic, and they don't follow the West, like they're completely different six tone, 6 note system kind of thing. But why I brought it up is that you probably heard like they just kind of like, you know, kind of, timing is not as important. So then, what happens is that's all beautiful and wonderful and great for a monastery, but what do you do if you're a country parish in Kievan Rus? So what happens is a tonal system develops called Galician. And Galician is basically a synthesis of Zanemi and cultural melodies that people kind of bring in, and becomes what's called Kievan kind of thing, because Kievan is the capital of the emperor at the time kind of thing. And in the 16th century, there's a movement to westernize notation, and there's emphasis becomes on performance choirs. Galician chant is all about like a group of people all singing the same melody together. There's sometimes an alto part that's done, so very similar to what St. Mark's does, and they sing it all together. And then in the 16th century, kind of they bring in the whole idea of choirs. They try to have a bunch of octaves, and that's where obligad comes. And so obligad is like a simplification of the Galician or Kievan chant, and it's meant to be nice and broad and loud. And so like what becomes in fashion in the Kievan thing is kind of the priest is like, or deacon is praying over top of the choir. So like, let us pray to the Lord, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. Like everybody just keeps on singing that, and then like the deacon's doing, again we pray for those who are sick and suffering, let's pray to the Lord, let us pray for those who, and so it just kind of keeps on going, and people are supposed to be like, oh, that's so beautiful, it's supporting him as he kind of does his harmony. And so it's meant for the priest to kind of soloize on top of the melodies. And so obligad is the chant that we do, and so it's based on that Galician Kievan chant that kind of happens. And so what happens is that many Western people try to, just to give an idea, so like this is Vesper. So obligad, or that. And just to give you an idea of that like overall sense kind of thing. So it's even hard to hear, but obligad is made for multiple octaves. So I don't know if you can hear, but there's a bass part, and he's 3 octaves below what you normally would sing. Yeah, if you're really, really sick from COVID, apparently, you can hit down that. So anyway, so that, the whole idea behind it is like you have that like whole tonal range kind of thing that goes there and becomes in fashion. And so then people kind of use it and take riffs on things and westernize and try to kind of take the thing. So this is an Emmy chant set to by Tchaikovsky, I think. So you hear the chant at the beginning. And then the Western polyphony kind of coming in. So basically, it kind of develops that way. There is, Bulgarian chant I brought up earlier. There's also like cultural ones, like we do it at Good Friday. We have the noble or the noble Joseph is actually a Bulgarian kind of cultural chant. And at this time, it becomes a fashion to like create a chant that's officially Greek or Bulgarian. So you'll sometimes see in your books, it says Greek or Bulgarian chant. It's just some composer that's like, oh, I'll create a new Greek chant that's Greekish kind of thing within there. And it's that kind of explosion of kind of stuff. So interestingly, that kind of music continues developing. So in North America, what happens is people come and there's different things. There's that happen here that kind of adapted to the North American style. So you probably wonder, like, when are we going to have a North American music kind of thing? What will it sound like? So there has been attempts. There's attempts to make kind of hymns that are based off of cultural music. So for example, this is an Appalachian Christ is Risen by a Russian composer in the States. So trying to sound very Appalachian style kind of thing, and there's people like Glagalev and also some Finnish and British composers that have done things. So Glagalev is probably most. So there's been a huge attempt in fashion lately of like, oh, well, we got to create modern melodies kind of thing. A lot of it centered around St. Vladimir. So Blaglev, probably the one that we sing here is Come Bless the Lord, All You Servants of the Lord, which was a communion hymn that St. Mark's uses. That's done by him. But there's also there's different ways that you can do it too. There's also ways of just adapting it to the choir, to the culture. So like people can just sing it in a way that sounds different, even though it's the same melody. So we all know like Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death. So if so this is after.
Sorry, might just be a little bit.
My apologies. This is a YouTube party. Oh, I don't have it. Okay, that's fine. Okay, sure. Here. So there's a video of them, they have drums and they're dancing around. So you can do the same melody and it sounds very different from what you're used to kind of thing in there. And like even Greek chant interestingly does that. So I'll just briefly show you, but like this is Arise, O God and Holy Saturday. Okay, and this is the same ethnic group of people, but in the States, people that have grown up here. So same melody, but it sounds much more smoother, much more kind of pleasing to what were kind of our eyes. So like it's not so much like it's that music has to become North American kind of thing. It just can be done in a way that is pleasing to people or that people are knowing. Like it's like you don't have to mimic exactly how it's done. So basically, that's kind of how we get to our chant that we have today. So we basically, should there be a North American style? I don't know. I mean, should we change the melodies that we have? I think there's actually kind of a beauty of like every culture has kind of brought in their things. I don't know if we really need to do an Elvis style thing. Like what would the style be? Elvis, praise and worship. I'm not sure what you can do. One of our benefits is kind of being a melting pot of cultures and kind of bringing it in. So we've kind of taken this, and this is the melodies that we do. Sorry?
Elvis started at church.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's actually why I chose him, because he's praise and worship by rock and roll. So, yeah. So basically we get to the point and we have the melodies that have been given. So we could choose to do other melodies. I could, if you wanted me to find a new melody to do the antiphon, I can find you probably 11 melodies with music kind of thing. But it's kind of like the Thousand Island dressing man of like, he goes to the restaurant every day kind of thing, and he could choose a different dressing, but he likes Thousand Island and it tastes good. So why change it kind of thing? Like, it's what's been given, and it's just kind of what we have to work with, right? And so, I think the definition would be like, is this foreign to people? Is this hard for people to understand? Is it too hard for people to do? But outside of it, like, it is the tradition we've been given, and by whatever accident, that's how we got kind of the melodies that we're at. So why bother singing in church? Like, what's the importance of this? So the quote I would present to you is, beauty will save the world. So you've probably heard this quote before. It's in The Idiot. But basically, it's the idea that there's something to beauty, right? Why are we even using music kind of thing? Why didn't we just speak it? Quakers don't really speak at all in church, actually. They're almost silent through the entire service. There's different ways that we could worship that wouldn't involve it. So there's kind of an importance of people coming into church and having the experience of beauty and having a sense of something different than what's in their life. And so there's different layers to beauty. The first layer I present is terudi, which is a phrase termed by C.S. Lewis, where my terror was the salute that mortal flesh gives to mortal beings. And he's talking a really good book called Till We Have Faces, of this woman that encounters a god, and in like Greek myth, and she's kind of can't decide if she's afraid or if she's in awe, kind of thing. And so she decides that it's terudi, kind of thing of hopefully beauty would bring in a sense that like I'm in another place, that I've entered into something that is beautiful, that God is here, right? We sometimes get so caught up in our culture has something called secularism, where basically God is over here in this other level of the universe, the second story, and you can kind of access him. He sometimes comes down and talks to us, but he's really meant to be up there, kind of thing. Maybe church, kind of thing. You pray. Everything else of life, God really doesn't matter. It's what you can see or see and smell in the world. That's kind of our secular mindset of society, right? And so church is one of the few opportunities that people get to see that maybe God is actually in the same story, that he's in the same universe. We so often we try to think of like the only time that God will come down is that he kind of changes the laws of physics through a miracle, or like speaks through a word, kind of thing, and we lose like the sacramentality of normal life and seeing God in it. And so the whole point of music is actually to bring God into the actual experience of this, and to realize that God is present and God is there, kind of thing. And it's funny how I was reading a saint, and he's kind of like, I spent my entire life looking for God, and then I realized that he was there in that very air that I breathe. It's kind of that realization that people bring in. And so it's kind of meant to be that grapes of the Holy Land of like, this is a taste of it, of what's coming, and this is why you should go through the whole war that's about to happen and all the struggles, kind of thing, because it's worth it because of these grapes. But it's also the whole idea of like the burning bush. God is present in the bush. He's coming, and he's talking through it. Hopefully, by singing, you're actually imparting God into it. Like the words that you're doing are what matters, right? Like no matter what you are praying or singing, whatever melody, that word is going to be the same, whether you're Greek or Bulgarian or Serbian or Russian or kind of things like that. But it's about imparting to somebody, God is the Lord. Like if anything matters, it's that. And what does that mean? Well, that means that you get to encounter the Word. The Word is a person. God, you are there. You are the Lord. That like if it's not doing that, it's probably not doing its way. It's either being too performative or too bad, or people are too distracted. But like that's the point. It's like hopefully beauty imparts that, and that's beautiful by itself. So whether it's beautiful singing or if it's the worst singing in the world, I've had some very powerful experiences of really bad singing, and had some good prayerful experiences in there, kind of thing. I don't think that it has to be like beauty by itself is about beautiful music. It's about imparting God, who's beautiful. It's also meant to be kind of a labor in the garden, and that's beautiful in itself. Your child comes to you and gives you a beautiful painting that I'm pretty sure that I would say it's beautiful, but I'm pretty sure that most of you would not say that my daughter's painting is a Picasso kind of thing. It's beautiful to me because it's her labor, right? It's her work in it, and that's kind of the same thing that you're doing here. This is like, I'm offering it to God. It's broken, it's imperfect, it's miswrought. The last time I made a prosphora, it looked like somebody had beaten it to shreds, kind of thing. But it was my offering, imperfect as it is, and that's okay, and that's beautiful, right? The act of itself is beautiful. The other thing too is that sometimes beauty is about disillusionment. I had an ex-girlfriend, I don't know where it was from, that always said to me, disillusionment is holy. Where I was kind of like, oh, the church is horrible, and this, and it never seems to work, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, that's awesome. You're in a place of disillusionment. You know what's not there so that you can go to where it is, kind of thing. And so why I bring this up is that people almost need a taste of beauty to realize that there's something broken in their life, kind of thing. And so anytime that church music can kind of impart that beauty, you're actually going to hopefully do that missionizing of them realizing that there's something more in their life. But also, if it's broken, like, that's okay too, because, like, you're not at heaven yet. We're not at the heavenly worship. We're not in Revelations yet. You know, that's okay. This is my imperfect offering, and, like, I know where it is and where I need to go, kind of thing. And then finally, you know, the encounter, right? That, like, in the end, like, all the presence of it, all the things about Jesus' prayer and praying and things like that, if you're not actually encountering God in it, it's useless. And so, the same thing with this worship. Like, if people aren't praying and aren't meeting God in the stands, then we might as well switch off and just say the words, right? Like, that's, if this is what it's supposed to support, is it's supposed to be our beautiful, unbroken offering where people meet God. And if that's not happening, if we're not offering and we're not meeting God, then why are we doing it, kind of thing? So that's where the beauty really happens. So on some practical things, you know, on the singing side, I would like to bring up some kind of practical advice here to end this off. So first of all, if you are leading worship or singing, it's actually not praying for those who sing. So we actually say that people who pray are those who prayed twice, kind of, or sing, pray twice, kind of thing. We pray for those who labor and those who sing, kind of thing. So there's kind of an understanding that singing is a work, that you're kind of your job. And so what is your job? Well, your job is to ensure beauty in prayer through order or taxis. It's like every single one of us is priests, but the priest's job is to make sure that we fulfill our priestly ministry to the world. It's like he's a priest to us priests, right? The same thing with us. Every single one of us can sing, but the person who leads is the person that ensures that, like, they've done the grunt work and prepared and practiced a little bit the night before, so that everybody else can just switch to the page and hear the first note and go, okay, that's the note that I need to sing and start it. It's like their job is to get to the point where everybody else can pray, kind of thing. And so that's the idea behind the prayer of it. So, you know, like helpful tips, like it's your job to lead. So if we get to like commemorating the Theotokos, it's usually about 20 to 30 seconds of time to look ahead, figure out what the note is, kind of thing, figure the page, kind of thing, so that when you get to you, O Lord, you can hopefully at least pray with the priest for the final glory to the Father, and then, you know, and then start singing, kind of thing. So you can actually like be preparing for it, because that's your job. Your job is to make sure that other people can sing, so that because you're the one doing the burden of that. You know, and like, you know, another trick is like sing quietly the note for a second after the amen to kind of get it. But like, you know, you don't have to rush to start. Your job is to make sure that people get off on the start thing, because like nothing is more jarring than people kind of having to restart again because you didn't get what the music was that was playing. So if there's one job of the person leading, is that everybody, as particularly in a congregational setting, it's that everybody kind of doesn't have to think about singing. So yeah, so the other thing about that is that, you know, focus on the leading the liturgy first. It's kind of annoying. When I direct, I usually forget to cross myself, and then I notice that people only cross myself when I cross myself, or bow when I bow myself. So if you can, maybe try to do that, because I feel like, particularly in a congregational setting, unfortunately, like people that are leading are usually the people that know enough about the liturgy of when to cross yourself or bow yourself, and then kind of end up leading that in a way. But like, your real job is not worry about that and to just sing. So if you can do that, that's great. But there's other people that are called to do that. You know, I used to joke with my choir director that like I was going to quit and go lead the people for a bit, because it seemed like no one knew what to do at the Cherubic hymn kind of thing. When the priest came out and bowed, nobody would do anything unless the choir bowed, but we were singing the Cherubic hymn, so we couldn't bow, kind of thing. So, you know, like that's another thing that you can do to contribute to the singing, is like crossing when people, when they say glory to the Father, Son, and people will remember and be like, oh crap, I need to cross myself, kind of thing. So anyways. So, you know, and then people sometimes say like, oh, I wish we could do more choral singing. Or, you know, I'm struggling with like leading this, or I'm not comfortable enough singing this Troparion kind of thing, and everybody else being able to sing. So I would just say that there's two sides of the church. One is that like everybody does choral leads kind of thing, and that's a dominant one in Russian, or like a psaltery in a Greek church kind of thing. It's really reforms in the last 50 years in the OCA that have caused people to start doing congregational singing, or Galician and Ukrainian and Carpatho-Russian churches that they come from that tradition of everybody singing together, right? And so you have that. Usually congregational is a lot simpler, but you lose complexity kind of thing and a bit of the beauty kind of thing, but choral can be hard and it's hard to people involved and people kind of go off. But there's probably a balance here, which, as I was talking about the singing, of call and response, right? So antiphons are like a verse that's being sung by somebody and then everybody sings a melody. Or, there's places that I think the balance is that if there's a part that always repeats, that's something that everybody can sing. And if it's a part that doesn't repeat, it's okay for somebody to just chant that plainly, to sing it kind of thing. It doesn't have to be sung all the time. And so not everybody has to sing the Troparion if, especially if you're not kind of complete with that. So it's okay for you to just do a solo with that or just chant that kind of thing. So I think that's a thing. And if you can sing it, and if you could get a choir together, that'd be amazing. That's a perfect time. Like the Trubic hymn is a time for the choir to go crazy kind of thing, or the Troparion of the day kind of thing. But Lord Have Mercies probably should be something simply that everybody can sing, and that isn't too fancy. And then just keeping it simple. I have sung in giant cathedrals with professional choir, and I've sung here with everybody singing kind of congregation, very little harmony kind of thing. I've sometimes had more prayerful experiences in the non liturgical giant groups of people doing it in the simplicity. I, for a very long time, worked at a place called St. John Compassionate Mission, which is a mission to the poor, and during the evenings we would have compline with a full choir and liturgy on Sunday with a full choir, professional choir director, 150 people would come attend church. It was beautiful. But during the day, when people, just average homeless person off the street, we'd invite people to come and do hours with us. And the melody there was incredibly simple. Basically what we did is the Ukrainian Catholic, Ukrainian Orthodox, Galician chant style, which is like, Holy God, Holy Mighty, Holy Immortal, have mercy on us, Holy God, and just kind of did that style all the way through. Oh Lord, cleanse us of our sins, Lord have mercy, and Lord have mercy, and that's all that we did. Everybody did that thing. There was no harmony ever allowed. It was actually forbidden. But it was, there was a beauty to that, and there was a bunch of people that were not trained in any sort of way that could do that, and there was a certain prayerfulness to that was almost better. There's sometimes beauty in simplicity. So, sometimes we get so caught up with trying to do the melody the way that we learned it or the way that we brought it kind of thing, but it's meant to all those things that I said about beauty. So if it's not there, then that generally is the best way of kind of doing it. It's about prayer. It's not about getting it right. And I would warn that simplicity loses some teaching, right? You often, melodies bring certain associations. So what do I mean by that is that in Byzantine chant there's like a tone 6, which is that's used all the way through Lent, of today he who hung the earth upon the waters, and then every feast has a point in the matins or compline kind of thing at the services that has a tone 6 that uses today, like today the Virgin is taken up to heaven. And so you're supposed to, by the melody and by the word today, be like, oh yeah, this is like somehow connected to the crucifixion kind of thing that's brought in. And so, just maybe keeping that in mind when you're singing is that sometimes when you oversimplify things, you lose that connection. And for example, Antiochian churches, they just chant that part, just straight chant it. And so you probably wouldn't make that same connection that's happening there. And so there's definitely times that we do that in our liturgies where there is a reason why that melody is there. And so why I bring that up is that we have 8 tones, but as I said before, that's really because monks get bored after singing the same thing over and over again, kind of thing. If you can't get a tone, I think it's pretty understandable that you would just do it in tone 4 or tone 5 or something like that. But at the very least, maybe learning like 1 or 2 tones, one that's kind of mournful and one that's kind of excited, would be helpful. In the Greek system and taken over into the Russian and other ones, tone 4 is kind of regal, celebratory. Tone 1 is kind of like, yeah, rah, rah, rah. Tone 2 is a little anxious, unsure. It's kind of like the climax kind of thing. Tone 6 is kind of mournful. Tone 5 is kind of like longing for. Tone 8 is like we've arrived kind of thing. They're meant to give that. I don't know if any Western person that doesn't know the popular songs that they're based on would get that kind of same association. And even worse, Byzantine major tone, which is what we consider like kind of happy, is actually sad in their culture. And kind of like chromatic, like ooh, is which we would consider sad, is actually their kind of happy things. So it doesn't always work out that way, but maybe knowing like 1 or 2 things and knowing like there's a reason why the tones change, but it's okay to simplify them if you need and to do it. Like no one is probably ever going to know that it was supposed to be in tone 6 unless they looked at the book. And I'm pretty sure that they were probably thinking about what they need to do after this day, that they forgot to put away the groceries, and not about the fact that you were on tone 6 and you sing a tone 4 melody kind of thing. So, yeah. Yeah. But you know, if you can, the more you can learn, the more you can bring in those connections kind of thing, because the simplification does lose that element kind of thing. And that's fine to sacrifice it if you need to, but like that's why people have taken that tonal system and then woven in all of these things, because they're like, oh, this one really needs to be celebratory, oh, this one needs to be mournful, let's do it in tone 6 kind of thing. So yeah. And then, what if I can't make something beautiful? What if I'm a horrible singer and I can't do it? I would just stress again, it's the song conveys the word, like it is the words that matter, the word, the logos, that's what matters. There's been centuries of okay music. As I said, Galician chant was developed by because there's a bunch of peasants and tribal people that were living there that heard these monks come by with Zanemi, and they're like, okay, I can kind of remember that. It kind of sounds like this melody. Let me kind of put the two together, and it just developed over time. And there's centuries of okay music in little tiny villages of 100 people with, John's grandpa who kind of remembers the piece, that is singing it, that no one feels like kicking out because, if they do, there will be a fight between the Luciuks and the Boychuks. So, because they've always been fighting over that cow since 3rd century. There's been a century of okay music, and people have still kept the faith and developed it and grown by it. It's no one's going to, I definitely beauty and choral music can bring people into the church. No doubt about that. But I don't think that it's, being slightly okay or not having the best music in the world is going to drive a ton of people away from it. If that is the case, then we're probably doing something wrong about Christianity. And then, so simple can be better. So I think that I don't think of St. Mark's, unless we manage to convert a singing Von Trapp family, is going to quite have award-winning choirs any, next few weeks kind of thing. Let's say I probably didn't do my job here. You're not all going to sing beautiful a cappella harmony by the end of this. But as long as it is that worshipful thing, and it is beautiful, it is simple, and it's doing it, I think that it will do its job. So I think that my point here was to kind of give you an idea of where this kind of came from, so you could understand it and what the liturgy was in there. But hopefully, you don't feel that we have to be like any of those chants or things like that. God put you where you are, and this is where, and He called you to do this one thing, and He's called you to sing and to offer your life back to Him in the broken way that it is, and that's beautiful. So it's not about beauty. Beauty is not some sort of aesthetic that has to be to it. It doesn't have to be the costume kind of thing. It can be the daughter's painting, and it's beautiful. I have one hanging on my wall that I think is decent enough that I can share with other people, and that's okay. So, anyways, thank you again. Thank you for having me, and It's really great to see so many people for Vespers. This is a record attendance in a long time. So thank you guys.
Any quick questions for Michael?
Very good. You were mentioning that it developed, it sounds like the same tone in different regions or different towns would actually be different, especially in some of the sub melodies and
Yeah, for sure. And so like, you go to a Carpatho Russian church, and you go to a Ukrainian church, one will call it Galician, the